Okay, today we're going to read The Past is Still Present, Why Colonialism Deserves Better Coverage. Talking about everyday things may seem banal, but great injustices happen when people grow accustomed to them. As the everyday colonialism correspondent, I intend to lead better nuanced, more accessible conversations. How do you report on a story that began hundreds of years ago, or cover a global phenomenon that spans continents and centuries? How does understanding the past help us make sense of the present? Despite hundreds of years of imperialism and colonialism, the mid 20th century marked a period where many countries in Asia and Africa freed themselves from former colonial rule. As a result, it is often thought, in both former colonizing and colonized nations, that colonialism is a thing of the past. In reality, it remains a powerful force in today's world. From Kashmir to Palestine, West Sahara to Crimea in South Ossetia, many parts of the world remain under direct military occupation. Countries such as Britain and the USA also retain control over colonial territories. And let's not forget the settler colonial countries such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, where the colonization of indigenous lands has been entrenched and institutionalized in the long term. Growing up in Malawi in the 1990s, I witnessed the enduring impact of colonialism for myself. I saw how the southern African country struggled to free itself from an oppressive one-party regime, one that had weaponized many of the structures inherited from the British colonial system. Even through the layers of privilege that swaddled me as a wee white Scottish boy, I could see that life at Malawi during those years was a kind of informal apartheid. Entrenched hierarchies of race, class, and gender were unmistakable and entirely normalized. If the colonial roots of this social order lay below the surface, it took only the merest brush to expose them. Ever since then, I've been preoccupied with understanding how colonialism continues to blight people's lives, helping create a shared understanding of what the word continues to mean. Colonialism, as I understand it now, is the structure or structures through which one group of people, typically a nation, subordinates and exploits another, then justifies this subordination and exploitation by claiming to be the intrinsically superior group. Colonial domination not only shapes our ideas about race, but also influences how people think about class, culture, gender, and sexuality. Think of the so-called anti-sodomy laws from the colonial era that criminalized homosexuality in dozens of countries around the world, from Bhutan to the Maldives, Gambia to Zimbabwe. In many cases, these laws have never been repealed. Human Rights Watch reported in 2015 that over half of the 80 countries worldwide where homosexuality is illegal were once British colonies. The LGBTQ activists who have been fighting hard to overturn the law, who have been fighting hard to overturn the law in Kenya against gay sex are literally struggling against the colonial rule. Over the next 3 months, working as the everyday colonialism correspondent, I want to rewrite histories of colonialism in a clear, nuanced, accessible way that equips us all to understand the complex forms it takes as it lives in our everyday realities. The concept of the everyday is not meant to trivialize my approach. Everyday can mean banal or ordinary, but great injustices can seem banal when people have grown used to them as permanent fixtures of day-to-day life. The enduring presence of colonialism. Colonialism blights the cultures of the colonizers as well as the colonized. The Martiniquais poet Aimé Césaire wrote that a basic feature of colonialism is the way it decivilizes those responsible. In Césaire's view, colonialism operates through extreme violence against colonized peoples. when this violence was justified and normalized by European beneficiaries of colonial rule, Césaire thought a poison was distilled into the veins of Europe, and slowly but surely the continent proceeded towards savagery. Yet the poison continues to be felt most acutely in the more insidious forms of violence that once colonized peoples still experience today. The laws, economic structures, and cultural basis for European colonialism didn't disappear when nations gained independence in the mid-20th century. The legacies of these empires continue to infest many aspects of our world, from borders, migration, and unequal citizenship to prisons, labor conditions, supply lines, healthcare, trade agreements, international development aid, education, diplomacy, tourism, art, and sport. In some cases, such as the Windrush scandal, the legacy of the past is all too clear. Since 2017, The Guardian has been reporting on how the British government erroneously deported at least 83 people of Caribbean origin who had settled in the country between 1948 and 1973 and has harassed and detained hundreds more as part of the official policy of creating a quote-unquote hostile environment for so-called quote-unquote illegal immigrants. Many of these people had arrived in Britain as small children, part of the Windrush generation, named after the ship that brought over 1,000 people from Jamaica in 1948. They helped to rebuild a country and society devastated by the Second World War, made lives for themselves, raised British children and grandchildren, and were rewarded with a litany of threats and humiliations. Reports showed that the UK government pursued people who had been born as British subjects in countries under colonial rule and who therefore had full British citizenship rights under a law passed in 1948. Others persecuted had come to live in the UK perfectly legally under the terms of the shifting legal framework around British citizenship and immigration during the period of decolonization up to 1973. In this case, the relevant history was reported in some depth since the UK government's ignorance of its own of its own history of colonial citizenship was fundamentally to the story. It was even shown that the UK Home Office had destroyed the landing cards that would have provided crucial evidence in favor of those threatened with deportation. The extent of official malfeasance was profound. An invisible past. Examples such as the Windrush scandal aside, when connections between colonial history and present crises are explicitly made in daily news reporting, these links are often mentioned only in passing. Reports typically include few concrete details of the context, because what counts as relevant is often limited to events of, at most, the last few years. The roots of autocracy and corrupt government run deep. Purely cultural ahistorical explanations not only risk reproducing racist tropes, they mask the role of powerful international corporate interests in sustaining systems of resource extraction, profiteering, exploitation, and rent-seeking that sustain the underlying economic transactions that has always made colonialism financially profitable for the colonizers. I want my work to be meaningful to readers whose lived experience has been at the sharp end of colonialism. Those readers whom colonialism represents a violation and dispossession that can never be fully redressed. But I'm in Edinburgh, working from within Europe as a white man. The world I describe above is not one in which I am positioned myself. As such, this beat is also about probing how to negotiate my own status as a beneficiary of these long histories. Like many readers of The Correspondent, I didn't choose to inherit my colonial complicity. This sense, I have my life being inescapably folded into lives and events that are decades, even centuries old. Those of us who come from colonizer societies have been failed not only by our education systems, which have tended to celebrate or simply ignore colonial histories, but also by dominant cultural narratives that claim to explain our colonial entanglements and connections without ever really taking them seriously. Every time we learn about some new facet of colonialism, these lessons possess an especially strong clarifying power. Without such knowledge, many complex realities in a place like Edinburgh today, or in many other parts of the global north, are simply inexplicable. Where we're ignorant, it's easy to lean on complacent ideas that naturalize the existing social and economic order, who gets marginalized, who gets privileged as not only the way of things have always been, the way things ought to be. We are not responsible for what happened in the past. That doesn't mean we have no responsibility now.